Ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who are online and those of you that are here, we're going to begin the services of Mr. Bernie Alpert. Rabbi Michael Schwab, Rabbi Alex Friedman, Rabbi David Weiss, and Chazan Ben Tisser will be officiating. The Shiva information you'll find on the service folder. Please be sure you read the part where if you're not fully vaccinated, the family wishes you to do something online, but please do not attend the home unless you're fully vaccinated. Except if you're under 12, then you're okay. Dietary laws at the residence are observed, but all that information is on your service folder, and for those of you who are online, it's on our website, as well as memorial contributions to the Chicago Jewish Day School and the American Jewish World Service. At the conclusion of the service, we'll ask the pallbearers and honorary pallbearers to come forward to escort Bernie's casket to the hearse. The procession will be forming in the parking lot. Please obtain an orange safety funeral sticker to place on the right-hand side of your windshield. Have your bright lights and hazard lights on at all times. For additional measures of safety, we will be providing a car in the back of the funeral procession to hopefully keep other cars from entering the procession. Use your horn liberally as you're going through the intersections, and please do not speak or text on your cellular phone while driving to the cemetery. Once again, this is a gentle reminder, please be sure that your phones are turned off as we begin the sacred funeral ceremony for Mr. Bernie Alpert.
We begin our funeral service for our beloved Bernie Alpert with Psalm 23. This psalm has a very special significance to Bernie and to the family. It was a favorite psalm of his, and it references the valley in which Fran and Bernie lived as they were living in Yerushalayim. Chazan Tisser will chant, and afterwards we can read it together.
Mizmor leDavid, Adonai roi lo echsar, bino desheyar bitzeni, harmei menuchot yenahaleni. Nafshi yeshover, nafshi yeshover, yanecheni b'magle tzedek leman shemo. Gam ki elech begetz al-mavet lo yirah ki ata imadi shivtecha Shanetecha, Shivtecha u'mishanetecha, Hema yenachamuni, Taroch lefanai shulechan, Taroch lefanai shulechan, Taroch lefanai shulechan, neged zorerai, dishaneta v'shemen roshi, dishanta v'shemen roshi, dishaneta v'shemen roshi, kosi revaya. Ach tov v'chesed yirdefuni ישבתי בבית אדוני, ושבתי בבית אדוני, לאורך ימים.
The English translation is found in your service folders. If you'd like to read it along with me, you can. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Surely the neshama of Bernie Alpert dwells in the house of the Lord forever. Now I'm going to call upon Rabbi Friedman to recite a psalm.
Shir Ma'alot, Esainai Aharim, Me'ayin Yavo Ezri Me'im Adonai, Ose Shemayim Ba'aretz, Ayiten Lamot Raglecha, Ayanum Shemecha, Hine Lo Yinum Velo Yishan, Shemei Yisrael, Adonai Shemecha, Adonai Tzilcha, Ayad Yaminecha, Yomam Hashemesh Lo Yakecha, Be'yareach B'layla, Adonai Yishmorcha Mikova, Yishmor El Nafshecha, Adonai Yishmor Sidcha Vorecha, Me'ata, Be'ad Olam. Psalm 121, a song for ascents. I turn my eyes to the mountains. From where will my help come? My help comes from Adonai, maker of heaven and earth. Adonai will not let your foot give way. Your guardian will not slumber. The guardian of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. Adonai is your protection, a guardian at your right hand. By day the sun will not strike you, nor the moon by night. Adonai will guard you from all harm and guard your life. Adonai guards you going and coming, now and forever. Amen.
Now I'm going to call upon David Weiss, beloved friend and rabbi, who will say some words about Bernie and also offer a psalm as well.
The late Rabbi Joshua Loth Liebman wrote these words: I often feel that death is not the enemy of life, but its friend. For it is the knowledge that our years are limited which makes them so precious. It is the truth that time is but lent to us, which makes us, at our best, look upon our years as a trust handed into our temporary keeping. We are like children, privileged to spend a day in a great park, a park filled with many gardens and playgrounds, and azure-tinted lakes with white boats sailing upon the tranquil waves. True, the day allotted to each one of us is not the same in length, in light, in beauty. Some children of earth are privileged to spend a long and sunlit day in the garden of the earth. For others, the day is shorter, cloudier, and dusk descends more quickly, as in a winter's tale. But whether our life is a long summery day or a shorter winter afternoon, we know that inevitably there are storms and squalls which overcast bluest heaven, and there are sunlit rays which pierce the darkest autumn sky. The day that we are privileged to spend in the great park of life is not the same for all human beings, but there is enough beauty and joy and gaiety in the hours if we will but treasure them. Then for each one of us, the moment comes when that great nurse, death, takes man, the child, by the hand and quietly says, "It is time to go home. Night is coming. It is your bedtime, child of earth. Come, you're tired. Lie down at last in the quiet nursery of nature and sleep. Sleep well. The day is gone. Stars shine in the canopy of eternity." Baruch Dayan Ha'emet. Praised is the judge of truth. Adonai Natan, the Lord has given. Adonai Lakach, and the Lord has taken back. Yehi Shem Adonai Mevorach. Praised be the name of the Lord. There is a legend, a vignette. Most of you will probably recognize it. It appears in several different versions in our tradition. But as Bernie spent the latter half of his life immersed in Jewish history and the archaeology of the land of Israel, I'll tell it this way. In the 2nd century of the Common Era, Rome ruled the world, and the Emperor Hadrian was the Roman emperor. He was not especially kind or gentle, to say the least. And one day he was traveling with his entourage throughout what is today the land of Israel. And he noticed off on the side in the field there was an elderly gentleman down on his hands and knees and with his hands digging in the dirt. And in, well, perhaps curiosity or maybe a rare moment of compassion, he said, "Stop," to his entourage, and he himself went out to the elderly Jew and he said, "What are you doing?" And as the Jew placed some seeds in the hole and covered them over, he looked up and he said, "I'm planting a tree." Hadrian said to him, "You're what? Why are you doing that? You're an old man. You'll never see that tree grow. You'll never enjoy its shade. Why are you bothering?" And the Jew said, "My ancestors planted trees, not for themselves, but rather so that I and my generation can enjoy their fruit and their shade. And so am I now doing likewise for others." This is so appropriate for Bernie. I think he recognized that all life comes as a gift from God, and that the earth is God's agent in the giving of life as well as the receiving of it back. Dust to dust, as the Torah tells us. Genesis 3:19, Ki afar ata, vel afar tashuv. For you are of dust, and to dust shall you return. For Bernie, as an archaeologist, over the past 4+ decades, immersed in the archaeology and the history of the Jewish people in Israel, the Adamah, the soil of Haaretz, the earth, the land, is a treasure chest. a safe deposit box of history, collecting and maintaining the clues, the reminders of our history, of who we were and of what we have become. The building blocks of the lives of our ancestors, which were foundational to their future, our present. Bernie was touched by the archaeology bug back in 1979 when you were living in Israel, 1980. And hence he immersed his life in the sharing and teaching of Jewish history through archaeology to so many others. He saw it, rightly so, as the key to what is Israel and who the Jews are today. If you were ever fortunate enough to have the opportunity to visit Fran and Bernie's home, one of his greatest pleasures, and it would have been yours as well, would be the visual and verbal tour Bernie would take you on through the various glass-covered cabinets, chock full of archaeological treasures, items of our history rescued from the earth, carefully labeled and dated by him by period and by function. A coin here, a jug there, a handle here, an oil lamp there. Alongside his wonderful partner, Fran, of 64 years. His deeply loved and deeply loving spouse, and also an archaeologist. They established and personally guided the famous Dig for a Day program in Israel, taking through the decades, as we learned in the death notice, tens of thousands of visitors, tourists, down into the exploration of the soil, the ground of Israel, and unearthing our history's treasures. A favorite personal memory of mine is from 3 years ago, as my wife Judy and I were in Israel with our children and grandchildren for the most of the summer. And of course we went to visit Bernie and Fran in their Yamin Moshe home. They asked our oldest grandson in that family, Max, who was 8 years old at the time, what was his favorite thing in Israel? Max proceeded with Bernie's kind and gentle encouragement. He regaled them. He talked your ears off for almost an hour about the burnt house, which he loved, an archaeological site in the old city, barely a block from the place where you first lived there. Anyone other than Bernie might have said, "Enough already." Bernie, on the other hand, reveled in his interest and engaged Max, encouraged him on as if he were a fellow adult, sharing his story. Yes, like the Jew in our story, Bernie was a planter, a giver, sharing the gems of our history and his wisdom with all of us whose lives he touched. Bernie was a modest soul, soft-spoken, one of the kindest gentlemen you will ever know. Fran, his wife, his children, Iris and Jerry, Abby and Michael, Danny and Andrea, Chava and Michael, and the late Joshua David. You have been so blessed to have him as a partner, as a father. And likewise was he a wonderful grandfather to Noah, Rachel, Sarah, Talia, Matan, Anino, and Ethan, and a loving uncle to his nieces and nephews, Avi and Carrie, Jessica, Cheryl, Howard, beloved brother to siblings and siblings-in-law, Shoshana, the late Seymour, his brother, and the late Phyllis. This beautiful, large family, his friends, our congregation, the Jewish people, indeed all humankind, have lost a prince with Bernie's passing. Cherished in his life as well has been that wonderful study group which Fran and Bernie, along with about 7 or 8 other couples, established here at Bethel. And every 2 weeks, every fortnight, they gathered together over the past 4+ decades to engage in the study of Torah as their children, now all grown themselves, would play at their feet and soak in the love of learning so beautifully exemplified by their parents. Judy and I were so honored to become a part of that group a few years ago, and I'm sure it was Bernie and Fran's impetus that brought us into it, so we thank you for that. Just 2 weeks ago, the group convened at Bernie and Fran's apartment, both to study and to celebrate your 64th anniversary. And Bernie, already much weakened by his illness, still sat with us all at the table and maintained his attention throughout. I believe his family will share with all of you here today and throughout the Shiva much of their early life. Fran shared some of that with me this past Friday. And as Bernie loved baseball, whether as a young man playing in Grand Park or in Israel where he organized an American-style baseball league for the youth there, he fearlessly came up to bat in the game of life. Many different pursuits. Some worked, some necessarily didn't. Bernie studied and graduated at the University of Illinois with a degree in agriculture. He worked for some time in the family poultry business and tried his hand in unfinished furniture before the spark of archaeology ignited his true passion. Fran, you and Bernie pursued your archaeological studies at Oxford University in England, where you each received your master's degree in archaeology, a wonderful accomplishment. Coming back to Israel, Bernie was and has always remained a staunch advocate of the Jewish state and of Jewish causes. I sort of thought of him as a Jewish swashbuckling Indiana Jones. He was a fearless activist for his people. If you had the opportunity to read the obituary, you would see that they came to Israel right after the Six-Day War. Throughout his life fighting Jewish causes, he was detained by the KGB in 1972 for smuggling Jewish objects into the Soviet Union's Jewish community. Traveled through Ethiopia in 1975, becoming an advocate for the Jewish community there, volunteering for American Jewish World Service twice, 6 months in India and Uganda. My gosh, what a life. What a life. I'm jealous. He pursued his Jewish interests here as well, with Bethel, with his studies, with his support of Solomon Schechter Day School and Chicago, the Chicago Jewish, and the American Israel Chamber of Commerce. But like the giving Jew planting in our story, Bernie's greatest devotion was to his wonderful large family. And so I urge you all to listen carefully and engage with the family in their stories, both here and throughout Shiva. And you too will be truly inspired. Share with them your stories as well. Bernie was multi-talented, kind, ever optimistic, warm and loving to all, gentle, modest, soft-spoken, a prince of a gentleman. He will be deeply missed by us all, but his spirit will ever remain with us who have been touched by his wonderful life. Zecher Tzadik Livracha. May the memory of the righteous always be for a blessing. Amen.
Thank you, Rabbi David Weiss, for such beautiful words. Now I'm going to call upon all of his children and their spouses to come up, as a number of them will share various words in memory of their dear father.
Wow, I can't believe we're all here for this. I wrote a letter to my dad, and I hope I can share it. Okay. Dear Dad, I'm so glad me and Jerry came out to visit with you and Mom over these last weeks. We had time to be going together, the four of us coming and going, dinners, lunches, appointments, a shopping spree. And then joining into the bigger circle of family, time with all. All of the precious ones who joined us, good times, precious times, until the very end. And even then, you were determined to beat what was coming for you to make it stop, defeat the movement of time, showing us all an awesome valor and pathos that was beautiful and painful to witness. You fought that mighty fight, even as you entered into the darkness of the night. You did not go gentle into the dying of the light. And so I wanted to let you know that I, along with family and all of your beloved friends who are here today, will never forget you. You will be inscribed in our hearts and memories as a binding of one to the next, the fibers of time and memory and history linking us together, shaping our actions, moving our thoughts and choices as we move forward from this day. And this you will live on. Thanks, Dad, for passing on to me a ray of the shining of the light that was within you, the light that lit your way, even into the darkest parts of the night. I'm sending you love, I'm sending you wholeness, and sending you peace. May you be held in the radiance of a loving, kind, and all-knowing, unfathomable light until we meet again.
I want to, as briefly as possible, express my unbelievable gratitude for being part of this family. He grew so close to Bernie, aka Buna. Although our lives had different trajectories, Buna was in many ways a kindred spirit. But Buna has taught me a way to live, to stand firmly to your principles, regardless of the headwinds that may come about, and to always remember those less fortunate in our community and the world. We shared times in Chicago, Boston, Michigan, Wisconsin, Florida, and of course, Jerusalem. Rabbi Weiss mentioned baseball. We watched baseball, and even a few weeks ago, Buna was very aware of pitches just outside that were called incorrectly by the umpire while the Cubs were batting. Buna and I loved the game, and it was a wonderful way to bond. His team was the Cubs, and although I grew up elsewhere, I adopted them as my secondary team, and I'm thankful we didn't have to have the conflict which would have occurred had they played the Yankees in the World Series. I miss you, Buna. You will always be a beacon to me for the rest of my days.
As I prepare to bury and mourn my father today, I've been contemplating the role I played as he grieved his father's death just a few months before my birth. My parents named me Abby Elise for Bernie's father, Abraham Isaac. My Hebrew name, Avigail, translated as my father's joy, suggests to me that new life in the family meant what new life in a family meant in a time of mourning. My name is a deep bond between my father and me, always blessing, sometimes burden. A few years ago at work, the question was posed, what name would you choose if you could choose to be called? The only name aside from Abby which I had ever considered was my Hebrew name. As I researched my name, I was delighted to find a different translation to my father's joy. Avi Gael, my father is joy. This small but significant change brought my thinking about our relationship full circle from what and expectations of what I gave to my father to what traits and values I have inherited from my dad that have been resources and gifts that have brought me joy. Many of these are born from his fundamental underlying belief in the importance of Ben Adam Lehavro, how we treat each other. I understand this as the ethical underpinnings of his faith and the principle from which so many of his actions flowed. The first of these is my father's generosity. He was generous with his time to family, friends, community, and his countries. His example of tzedakah extended to family also. Even when he was not talking to me, he told me through my mom that he was sending a little money so I could go out to dinner, have a good time. When I was a single mom bringing up my son Noah, my dad was so generous. It's not easy as an adult to accept help from one's parents, but these feelings were diminished by the generous spirit in which he gave. Never begrudging, no strings attached. My greatest joy in life is mothering, and my dad often expressed admiration for who I was as a mother. I am grateful to you, Dad, for allowing me the time and space to be the attentive, loving parent that you were proud of. Another aspect that brought me joy was his sense of humor and fun. I can remember the happiness I felt as a child, watching him laugh hysterically with his friends, his sometimes crazy antics, and his ability to laugh at the absurdity of life. My sense of humor was shaped by Bernie, a gift that lent me much needed perspective, the ability to laugh at myself and find fun in my life. Finally, and most impactful, is my father's commitment to social justice, to tikkun olam, and to helping those in need. His example of devotion and service has been a primary influence in my life. Frequent visits to elderly family members and his cousin at the Jewish Home for the Blind, weekly visits to the hospital with Shabbat candles for patients, blowing the shofar at nursing homes, his work on developing the conservative funeral plan to support affordable funerals, and then Aline and Melabev in Israel. These actions and many more made a profound impression on me. His ethical compass shaped my identity as a Jew and as a human being and informed the values in my life's work. The meaningfulness in living by Ben Adam Lechavero has brought healing and great joy to my life. These are some of the things I think about when I think of the joy that comes from living my father's values. I will carry you in my heart and thoughts all the days of my life, Buna. But rest assured that should I forget, all I need is for someone to call me by my name, Abby, Abigail, the name that connects me to you and to joy always. I love you, Dad.
Bernie welcomed me into the family, and I felt his unending support from the beginning. He was a great father-in-law. I want to share a moment in our relationship that I feel encapsulated an aspect of our relationship that was truly special. When Danny and I were planning our wedding, Bernie had very strong views about the Jewish components of our wedding. Anyone that knows Bernie knows that he was not shy about sharing his views with strength and persistence on anything, especially when it came to Judaism. While Danny and I were in full agreement on many things, I was not comfortable with one tradition and thus did not feel comfortable using it in our wedding. While Danny offered to speak with him, I decided that I must do it, and I did. While I know it was hard for him to give up his desires, he found a way to listen to me and to hear me. He came to accept what I felt comfortable with. I'm sure that this signature moment set in motion what came to be a relationship of mutual respect and, in certain critical moments, of listening. In difficult moments within the family, he often sought out my counsel, and I gave him my opinions openly, honestly, respectfully, even when they were different than his. I think perhaps as an in-law, it was less complicated for him to really listen. Bernie was a large presence, and I will miss him dearly.
My father was one of a kind. This is not just an offhand statement. Rather, it was the core of who he was, and in some ways, his life's mission. He was an individualist, committed to becoming his own man, to doing what he believed, to saying what he meant, and to making his ideas and dreams a reality, no matter what. He was an adventurer. He and my mom never stopped traveling, reaching literally all four corners of the earth, from the Seychelles to Tierra del Fuego, from Alaska to New Zealand, so many trips I've lost track. They would set out with only a small suitcase, sometimes for months at a time. Often there's no itinerary. There were a few reservations, a few firm commitments. They would arrive at a city, find a hotel, look for the kosher fish or veggie restaurant, explore, move on, and come home with a bag of souvenirs. Each trip was an opportunity. He believed that an individual could change the world, and he worked for so many causes over the years. But again, the best of them were those that overlapped with an adventure. I remember standing at O'Hare. I was maybe 8, waiting for them to arrive home after he and Mom and the Bravermans had been detained in Moscow by the KGB, or returning from Ethiopia with bags full of crafts made by the lost Jews there. We later worked to get out from there and into Israel, or meeting them in Uganda, where they were volunteering for American Jewish World Service. I was there producing some videos for AJWS, and in the context of this, I had to interview them for the videos. I would not recommend that to anybody. It's very complicated to interview your parents. He felt none of the constraints that many felt in their ideology or religious approach. He went from civil rights to Nixon to Obama, from Shamir and further right to Rabin and further left. At different times, he was a reform, conservative, conservadox, orthodox, and then back again. This is not to say, as Andrea said, that he was ever wishy-washy. He simply believed that as the world and circumstances changed, he could too. And trust me, he believed each and every one of those positions with a fiery conviction. He did not avoid conflict, as many of you know here. He spoke his mind. He stood behind what he thought was right, even at the cost of lost friendships, strained relationships, and the ire of his community, even here within these walls. He was a skeptic, a free thinker. If you were going to have a discussion with him about religion or politics, he loved to play the outsider, to push your buttons, taking the contrarian position. He left little room for dissent. His positions were always right, according to him. He was always looking for an opportunity, and he believed in his ideas deeply and reinvented himself over and over. I don't know this for a fact, but my sense is that this started as a young person in Albany Park. He told some fun stories from there, but my sense was always that he was eager to get away from there, and maybe from his father. His older brother Seymour protected him and gave him that out, and he grabbed it, never looking back. He went through so many businesses, always coming up with an idea and making it happen. Many of those failed, but it did not stop him from doing it again and again and again. Even in this last year, he would say, "What about this?" and follow up with his newest scheme. His biggest reinvention was the move to Israel. A lot of the people in the community were flummoxed, and in our family, some were angry. And in many ways, as a family, we paid a price. But Dad went for it, moving to the heart of the drama in Jerusalem's Old City, diving into politics, making the big turn from business to archaeology. He always said that he didn't believe in God, but he did believe in the history of the Jewish people. And in this move, he saw himself as part of that sweeping, epic story. On another note, before I wrap this up, none of his adventures, none of his achievements would have happened without my mother. She is and always has been the man behind the curtain, making actual plans, organizing his big ideas. I remember so clearly as a kid driving in the station wagon with Mom and Dad sitting up front, Mom sitting with her yellow pad, taking down what he said as he pontificated. He loved my mother, and she loves him so intensely. With each adventure and reinvention, she followed him on. I believe his love for her really did grow deeper. At my wedding to Andrea, I spoke about the power of the love of a good woman. He was lucky to have you, Mom. Your love was his engine. It's not been easy to be Bernie's son. I often felt unseen by him as he cast his long shadow. Me and my sisters were often unwittingly caught up in the whirlwind of his larger-than-life adventures. He often took issue with my views, questioned my choices, and we had our share of conflicts. But as so many sons before me, I swore that I would be different. And in some ways I am. But as also happens so often with age and genetics, I'm also keenly aware of how similar we are and how this individualistic ethic fundamentally shaped me, what I do in the world, and many of my relationships. As I reflect on this, and as we have talked about him in recent days, I keep coming back to a core truth of his life, and perhaps his greatest lesson. Live life fully. Seize the day. See life as an opportunity. Do not be constrained by the way things are or have always been, or by stale ideas. Do everything you can do to arrive at your end with as few could have and should haves as possible. Last Thursday, my father died peacefully in his own bed, surrounded by his 4 kids and his adoring wife. He lived a good, long life. He lived it to the fullest and died as he had lived on his own terms. May his life be an example to all of us, and may his memory be a blessing. Yehi zichro baruch.
How to begin? Where to begin? How do you start a tribute to someone who had such a profound impact on so many lives? Who had such an impact on my life? I'd like to start with the idea that this is a tribute to his life and not a commentary on his death. And while Bernie had many contributions that made the world a better place, I'm only going to speak about how he made my world better. When Bernie officially became my father-in-law, he quickly dropped the in-law part of that word and jumped in with both feet on the father part. He never missed special occasions or times when congregations were when congratulations were in order. He'd always call just before Shabbat to wish us a good Shabbos. He'd even call just to say hi and ask me one of his many catchphrases, "So, what's doing?" Sometimes after a long chat, he'd say goodbye without asking to speak to anybody else. Bernie had a way of making me feel included, special. When Bernie first met me, I was a young motorcycle-driving, long-haired 20-something who knew practically nothing about Judaism. To put that in perspective, outside of family, I didn't know another Jewish person in my entire childhood. I never had a bar mitzvah, I didn't keep kosher, I went to a college with a Jewish population of less than 20. That included me. I didn't go to shul. Heck, I didn't even know it was called shul. My entire life had been absent of Jews and Jewish traditions. I always knew I was Jewish, but in my mind, that meant I was Jewish in blood alone. Now, imagine my being thrown headfirst into the Alpert clan. Think about that for a moment. I mean, looking back, right, you're laughing. Looking back, it's almost comical. It's like a Jewish Saturday Night Live skit. But let's be real, things with Bernie could have gone many other ways than it did. I could have easily been rejected outright as not being Jewish enough for his standards. But that's not what happened. Not even close. I can honestly say that I never once felt anything other than pure, authentic welcome from Fran and Bernie and Chava's siblings. And as I started my journey of Jewish learning and exploration, there was no better example than Bernie to demonstrate what it meant to be a Jewish man, father, and husband. Do what I can to try and make the world a better place. Provide a Jewish home and education for our children. Treat my wife as the Eshet Chayil that she is. A serial entrepreneur for many years, Bernie was always interested in what I was doing at work, always looking for advice to give or wisdom to share, and always wanting to banter with me about it. He'd play the role of the big shot, pretending to communicate with the owners of my company to put in the good word for me so that one day I could move up from scrubbing toilets, which is the job we'd pretend I was doing. Eventually, this became a running banter between us, and to an outsider listening in, it probably would have been perceived as a successful entrepreneur teaching this young janitor how to rise up through the ranks and run the company. I guess in some metaphorical way, it was like that because the banter always transitioned into actual stories and advice about how to handle a particular situation I was dealing with at the time. By the way, Bernie, feel free to put in a good word for me with the boss. Bernie believed in shared experiences through and through. You know, Bernie wasn't what you'd call an avid reader, but every book he did read, he thought everybody else needed to read it too. About 8 to 10 years ago, Bernie read this book by Harold Kushner called The Lord is My Shepherd. By the way, you should all read it, it's really good. It's a great book. It deconstructs the 23rd Psalm, devoting an entire chapter to each line of the verse. Bernie read this book and was so moved that he gave a copy to all of us. I think it framed and solidified the perception of death that he had until his last breath. You know, in true sort of Alpert fashion, with Fran and Bernie, there has to be a little bit of learning. So I want to share a small tidbit of wisdom from Kushner's book that I believe was the most impactful to Bernie. Many associate the 23rd Psalm with death and the fear of dying. Just look at the most well-known phrase of the verse, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. The shadow, the casting of the eventuality of death. Kushner believes the shadow isn't the fear of dying. Rather, it's a fear of not having lived long enough to have the kind of impact on the world you always dreamed you would. We know that when we die, our physical body is buried and returned to the earth from which we originally came. But the things that make up our soul, our memories, our values, the sense of humor, our personality, the deeds that we have done for others, those are the things that death has no dominion over. Those things live on. And thus, we die knowing that we never really die. I know that Bernie believed this because we talked about it once. Today, we'll bury his physical body, but his soul, his spirit, and the impact that he had on the world, on each of us, that all lives on. Bernie will live on because he continues to live within us all.
Today is Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, the 17th day of the Jewish month of Tammuz. The Jerusalem Talmud maintains that this is the date when the Babylonians breached the walls of Jerusalem on their way to destroying the first temple. And this is also the day the walls of Jerusalem were breached by the Romans in 69 CE, after a lengthy siege. 3 weeks later, on Tisha B'Av, the Romans destroyed the second temple. How fitting that you, Abba, should be buried today. Not just any day, but a day of significant importance to the Jewish people. A day of national mourning, a day of loss and sadness, a day of transition and change. Throughout my lifetime, and often in this last week, we all sang together to my dad, Kol ha'olam kulo gesher tzar me'od, ve'ha'ikar lo lefachid klal. The entire world is a narrow bridge, and what is essential is not to be afraid. Buna sang this song over the years with commitment, joy, and enthusiasm. My Abba lived his life and died by this verse attributed to Rabbi Nachman of Wroclaw. He lived life to its fullest with great gusto and no fear. He acknowledged the hard places and embraced the opportunity to lean into them and learn and explore them, never to be afraid. When he was ready to go on his final crossing of the bridge, this too he did on his terms. He often told us that he was not afraid to die, and he showed in this process, his truth. So although this is a little bit unconventional, I'd like to ask all of you to join us as we sing one final round of Kol Ha'olam Kulo together. For my Abba, in his final transition, for the bravery, risk-taking, and adventure that he shared with us, and as a reminder to not be afraid, to seize the opportunities that come your way. Thank you, Abba. I love you. Here we go. Kol ha'olam kulo gesher tzar me'od, gesher tzar me'od, gesher tzar me'od. Kol ha'olam kulo gesher tzar me'od, gesher tzar me'od. והעיקר, והעיקר, לא לפחד, לא לפחד כלל, והעיקר, והעיקר, לא לפחד כלל.
I was asked by Fran to sing one more piece of my choosing at this time, and I settled on Yerushalayim Shel Zahav. I first met Bernie, and I shared this with Fran just before the service, 22 years ago. I was in Israel as a teenager, and we were brought to dig for a day, and I remembered a very passionate, excited for us as we dug. Short, older. I was 16, he was older man leading the dig, and it was Bernie Alpert. Bernie and Fran came back to Bethel just before I came 6 years ago, and for 6 years they've been my friends, sitting on my side of the sanctuary and singing with gusto every week. And so I'll ask that in Bernie's honor and in his memory, you'll join me in singing the first and the last verses, the last, of course, exemplifying what Bernie loved so much about Israel, not just its past, but Chazarnu el borot hamayim. We came back to the water wells, we came back to the squares. They made Jerusalem and Israel not just a home for them, but for all of us who have had the opportunity. אוויר ההרים צלול כיין וריח אורנים נישא ברוח ארבעים עם כל פעמונים ובתרדמת אילן ואבן שבויה בחלומה העיר אשר בדד יושבת ובליבה חומה ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת הלא לכל שירייך הניחי נור ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור הלא לכל שירייך הניחי נור חזרנו אל בורות המים לשוק ולכיכר שופר קורא בהר הבית בעיר העתיקה ובמערות אשר בסלע אלפי שמשות זורחות ושוב נרד לים המלח
בדרך יריחו, ירושלים ושל אור, הלא לכל שירייך אני כינור, ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור, הלא לכל שירייך אני כינור, כינור.
Now going to call on all of Bernie's grandchildren to come up. Order's right here.
All right. Oh, I'm sorry if I go a little long. Apparently there was a time limit that I was not informed of. So, when my mom asked if I'd like to speak today, I knew immediately that I wanted to share the first emotions and thoughts that went through my head the moment that I found out that my grandfather, Bernie Alpert, or Buna as I named him when I could barely say the name Bernie, had passed. Two opposing feelings or ideas. One was loss, the other, gain. Both streamed through my mind. In that moment, I felt immeasurable loss. We were losing a grandfather, a father, a husband, a patriarch for our little Alpert clan, little both in size and in stature. And as I look around this room, I'm reminded that his impact extends well beyond his family. One moment, my grandfather is there, a phone call away at most. The next, there's a Buna-sized hole in all of our lives. Who will deliver such a thunderous kiddush with so much gusto every Shabbat? Who will be there in those moments I can't turn to my mom for help? Who will take me to a Cubs game when I'm in town? I can't tell you exactly how long that call with my mom was, or how long I sat in silence. But then that second, that minute, it passed, and strangely my thoughts shifted from loss to gain. Because the truth is, Buna is more than a moment. He is the countless memories, the physical characteristics, the personality traits. First, I thought about, oddly enough, his nose, because it's literally a part of my identity. Thanks, Buna, real psyched about that one. I thought about all the times I've refused to accept the physical, facial comparisons between me and a young Buna. But now, even though I still don't see it, I take those comparisons with great pride. I thought about the dinner dates with my grandparents, the many family trips, and the bedtime stories, memories I hold dear. Not all the times were great, but for every bad memory, there are many more good ones. Most of all, as many people have touched on today, I thought of his unrelenting stubbornness to fulfill his wishes and will, a trait which now flows through every Alpert. I swear, some of us are the most stubborn. I mean, we are the most stubborn family, so much so that some of us will stubbornly refuse the fact that we are, in fact, stubborn. Buna is so stubborn, he overcame cancer 18 years ago, and then again defied expectations after many family members flew in last year to say what we thought were final goodbyes. Spoiler, they were not. Yeah, he is stubbornly resilient, enough to deny death at his door far longer than most. We often think of being stubborn as being a bad thing, but without it, would any of us Alperts be where we are or who we are today? I certainly can say I wouldn't. As I look at this crowd, I can see bits of Buna speckled among us, the people he impacted most. I'd like to ask everyone to take a moment, close your eyes if you'd like, and think about Bernie Alpert. Think about the good memories and the bad. Think about what he gave you, tangible and intangible. What does Bernie mean to you? I'm sure for some of you, this moment is far from enough time to think about everything that Bernie means to you. You probably didn't notice, but I have not used past tense throughout this speech to talk about Buna. And that's because he isn't gone. From my point of view up here, he isn't a past tense. His will to live, his stubbornness, his love, his work, his happiness and sadness, the memories, the moments, his legacy, he lives on in all of us. So take a moment to grieve, because we've lost so much. But when the moment passes, don't lose yourself to despair, but celebrate his life. Look at what we gained from our time with him, what he passed on to the next generations. Lador Vador, I love you, Buna. You'll be with me always.
I just gotta be tall for a second. Before I begin, I just want to say that for true proof that Buna is still with us, several of them have a bet on how long I can make it without crying into my speech. And apparently there is some serious money. So I will try to stay strong. Like I said, I have always felt emotion very strongly. Love and grief have enveloped me easily. Smiles and tears flow freely. Buna was the same way. He was deeply passionate, fueled by emotion just like I am. Despite how large my emotions feel, it has always been the little things that bring them on. I loved Buna for the way his eyes squinted when he smiled, for the sonority in his voice, and for how when he saw me he would say, "Hey, Adali," because it was those things that I loved the most about him that seemed so minuscule. So small, too, are the things I miss the most. I woke up the morning after his death and I cried because I will never feel his stubble on my face when I lean in to give him a kiss. I will never feel the softness of his fragile fingers in mine, and I'll never hear him ask how the car is running. Those things, those physical sensations I never even thought about are the ones I miss the most. Buna's body was strong, just like his will, and it served him so well for so many years, pushing through the first bout of cancer and standing on the bima for 6 of 7 B'nai Mitzvot, giving countless hugs and wrapping himself in his talis every Saturday without fail. But finally, it couldn't take it anymore. Weathered by a life full of living, his body gave out. So here we are, celebrating his life and wallowing in the sadness his death brings. I know he wants us to grieve, not so that we can feel upset by his death, but so that when the mourning ends, we can feel as much love and passion for one another as he did. Even though he is gone, pieces of him surround me in the form of my family, things we all inherited from him. Noah's fiery passion, Rachel's love for travel and culture, Sarah's intellectual curiosity, Tali's wit, my stubborn loyalty, Matan's joking nature, and Ethan's moral compass are all traits, fragments of his legacy and spirit that live on. Like I said, all he would want in this time is for us all to continue loving and supporting each other as much as he did. Thank you.
Many people knew who Bernie Alpert was. Throughout my life, orbiting in and out of the Jewish community, Jewish day school, Israel, camp, synagogues, all over the world, I've met countless individuals who knew my grandfather or knew of him. It was an honor to be his granddaughter. But I'm not here to talk about Bernie the philanthropist or the activist or the agent of change. While these traits are admirable and have instilled within me a similar passion, for standing up for what I believe in. Who Buna was to me goes beyond his immaculate public image. Buna was my grandfather, a mentor, and a friend. He would call me Dolly. He played games with me. He brought me to new places, always made a point to show me where the best ice cream or falafel was. He always made me want to be a better person by living his life with a spirit of generosity and zeal. I did not grow up in Chicago like my other cousins, and still, Buna would keep up on my life and visit me for all major events. As most of you know, Buna's larger-than-life personality and strong leadership qualities could light up and bring together any community. Still, it was his softer side that struck me the most. It was the moments where he would comfort me when I cried, shared delicate wisdoms around a Shabbat table, or just held my hand walking down the street. It was his moments of introspection and grace that truly tied me to him and made him an inspiration to me. His kind spirit and desire to teach me about the history of our people and of our family has left a huge imprint on my heart. I feel a deep sense of responsibility to him and all those who have come before me to preserve family values and traditions, continuing upon the legacy that he worked so hard to give us and to give the world. Buna always supported me. He believed in me even when I was unsure about my next move. As Ani mentioned, his traveling spirit lives deep within me, guides me through the countries and cultures I encounter that he too traversed. I continue upon my journey without his physical presence, but I'm comforted by knowing my grandfather lived a long and prosperous life, a life that has inspired me and many others, moving us all deeply, a life in spirit that will always be within reach, as I feel him already protecting me and listening to me. Buna, I will miss you. I could not have asked for a more phenomenal grandfather. I know that you are proud of me, but I don't think I ever let you know how proud I am of you, how in awe I am of your being. Thank you for all of your gifts. I love you.
I also have written my remarks in the form of a letter to my grandfather, who, as we've spoken, we called Buna. Dear Buna, I've been thinking a lot recently about what it means to have done enough in the world, to have lived a life worth living. The question of legacy seems to peer back at me from everywhere I look, from the closing number of In the Heights to career planning worksheets at my university to your now empty chair at the head of the Shabbat table. I think it's a worry I inherited from you. You always had such a strong sense of obligation to the change needed in the world, a drive to create something that would outlast you. I wear a quote around my wrist from Pirkei Avot that I also inherited from you. Lo alech hamlacha ligmor velo at bat chorin levatal mimena. It's not on you to finish the work, and you are not free to abstain from it. It's and, not but. The latter clause doesn't refute the former, it simply adds onto it, giving two truths to hold in each hand. A life worth living is found in the balance of making your mark on the world and acknowledging that others will take up the mantle before you feel your work is done. You did enough in making your mark. Founding Dig for a Day, which is now a must-visit in Israel, blowing the shofar on the steps of a synagogue in Russia and working to save Soviet Jews, going back to school and graduating with a master's degree in your 50s, writing a book on archaeology and the biblical record, starting a Roman-themed restaurant and Toy of the Month club and seemingly endless other businesses, being a master mason and working your way up to be the head of the Masonic Lodge, plus so many more. And you prepared the next generation for when the torch would be passed to us, calling me every Friday of college to say Shabbat Shalom, teaching me to lay tefillin, singing opera kiddush, and instilling the firm belief that whole milk is better than skim. You may be gone, but your legacy remains here, in me, in your other grandchildren, children, and many others whose lives you touched. We hold the values, the responsibility, the tradition, and the bravery that you modeled for us, and we will pass them forward in turn. Reflecting on your life has shed light on my hopes for my own. If I can inspire my grandchildren to follow the unconventional route while being rooted in tradition, if the stories I have to tell are a well that never runs dry, if the paths I have traveled outweigh the ones I have not, and the adventure of my ideas is paralleled only by my stubbornness in seeing them through, then I will have done enough. If I can do all this as you have, I will have lived a life worth living. Thank you, Buna. I'll miss you.
Hi, everyone. One quality that always stood out to Buna, for me, was his concern for making sure that everyone was taken care of, especially his family and especially his grandchildren. He always made sure that we were secure and never had to want for anything. One time when we were in Florida visiting, we went out for Chinese food on Christmas Eve. We were all placing our orders, and Buna decided to order fried rice. Now, he didn't even want fried rice, but he was so concerned that one of us would want it that he ordered it anyway. He then tried to get some of us to eat it, even though we had all gotten our own food, and we didn't really want fried rice at the time. He did this through a variety of methods, the most notable of which was walking around the very crowded restaurant with a plate of fried rice, trying to convince us to take some. And when that didn't work, attempting to sneak it onto our plates without us knowing. He so deeply cared for us and our well-being. I remember that on the 64th anniversary dinner that we had for Buna and Safta, I was exhausted. I had just gotten off of working 5 days in a row, and I was falling asleep. And Buna, sitting next to me, nudges me in the middle of dinner. He goes, "I'll sleep if you do, so that way you're not embarrassed." This just showed how much he cared about us and how important it was that we were all fed and taken care of. And these stories, while funny, are just a few of many examples of that. That kind of love and care is reflected in how many people are here today. And that kind of love and community and caring that all of you have shown and that he showed never dies. Thank you.
Thank you to all the grandchildren who spoke so beautifully. This is an incredible family. And what a tribute to their grandfather, their Buna. What a tribute from the children to their father. And this is a huge loss to our community. It's a huge loss to everybody who knew Bernie. And I'll share more of my remarks maybe over the Shiva time period, but I do want to share just a few quick points about an important and beloved figure here at Bethel for all of those who knew him in this community, on behalf of the entire congregation and all of the clergy. Yesterday we recited some very important words from the prophet Micah. It says, "God has told you, O human, what is good and what the Lord requires of you, only to do justice and to love goodness and to walk modestly with your God." That's Bernie. He was a man who was compassionate, he was caring, he was bold, but he was modest, and he was a wonderful Jewish soul who valued our traditions and the Jewish people as he valued all of God's creations on earth. He followed what Micah said. It's therefore my honor and sad honor and condolence to express my condolences to the entire family who we've all heard from. Many moving words of tribute have already been shared about what a beautiful man he was and how devoted he was not only to the Jewish tradition, but to the Jewish people that he loved so much. And so many Jews that he affected through his work at the Dig and in all the different relationships that he had that brought all of you out there and so many more on the live stream. His immersion into Judaism went even beyond this, what everybody knows. Does everybody here know that he put on tefillin every single day since his father passed? Some of you know that they're regulars here at Bethel or wherever they are, Bernie and Fran, whatever shul they go to, wherever they be in the world. They always call the shul in Judaism their home. Bernie cared passionately for Jews, but he also cared passionately for everyone he knew and for humanity in general. He was involving himself, as was mentioned, in the American Jewish World Service, involved in politics because he cared for human beings, individual and collective. He followed his passions, he followed his values, and he set an example for all those who knew him. I just want to give two illustrations that weren't mentioned. Two Bethel kids, Richard Rabinowitz and Rabbi Bill Hamilton, now of course full-grown adults, made it a point to call me and to share with me that Bernie was a role model for them, a person of great significance in their lives, a person outside of their own families who they looked up to and changed their lives. Bernie not only affected his own family and his own generation and the institutions, the people who knew him, who looked up to him. Maybe he didn't even know the great influence he had on those around him. As Bill said to me, to him, Bernie will always be connected to the Hallel prayer, a man who sings the praises of our people and our traditions, and who always brings joy and insight to occasions in our lives. Ein gomrim hallel im Bernie. The Hallel never ends if Bernie's around. And as a couple of the grandchildren said, he is around, and he always will be. I personally saw in the years that we overlapped here at Bethel that he began an initiative with me and Rachel Ferber and his buddy Av Kraft. This is the compassion. I gave him a list of people to visit before Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur to blow shofar for those who couldn't come to Bethel to hear the shofar themselves. They went to every single house. They went to all the local nursing homes. They made sure everyone heard the shofar. He took his time and his heart and his compassion, and he lent it to others. That's just one illustration of the incredible man that Bernie was and always will be. So many more were shared and so many could be told. And he did like to tell stories, so you should too. I also learned that I share a great family history with Bernie. My bubby also grew up in Albany Park, and like Bernie went to Hibbert Elementary and Von Steuben High School, and likely even lived in the very same building. I'm going to treasure that connection I have with him and all the times we spent together at Bethel and beyond. But my final word is to say something about Bernie the husband. Fran, from my own observations, and by all account from children and friends, you were always number one in his life, hands down, hands down. He loved you with such passion. He was devoted to you like no other. I loved when you recalled to me your first date. On the one hand, so impressive, an older guy who showed up in a convertible. On the other hand, you opened the door and you saw this skinny man with a goofy-looking fisherman's hat and a big nose, and he took you smelt fishing on his first date. Who does that? Who does that? But somehow you were impressed by him, right? Bernie does that. You could see his character, you could see his special neshama, and you created a wonderful life in this fantastic family that we all just saw get up here and say such wonderful words. Your loss is indeed so great, but he will always be with you as you are surrounded by so many who love you both. So whether you remember Bernie for his prankster nature and his smile, his dedication to the Jewish people, his passion as an educator, his loyalty as a friend, his love of stories, his erudition as a scholar, or righteousness as an advocate for those who need him, or his love as a family member, friend, and community member, let all of us remember Bernie as the true blessing he was. Yhi zichro baruch, may his memory always be for a blessing, and let us say amen. I'll ask you to kindly please rise as the Chazan chants the memorial prayer in his memory.
Male rachamim shochein b'meromim hametzei menucha nechona tachat kanefei hashechina. במעלות קדושים, במעלות קדושים ודיורים, כזוהר הרקיע זהירים. את נשמת דוב בר בן אברהם ומנוחה שהלך לעולמו. בגן עדן תהא מנוחתו ענה בעל הרחמים. הסתירהו בסתר כנפיך לעולמים, וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתו, אדוני הוא נחלתו. וינוח בשלום. משכבו ונאמר
Amen. Exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure, to the soul of Dov Ber ben Avraham V'Menucha, Bernie Alpert, who has gone to his eternal home. Merciful One, we ask that our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. May he always rest in peace. And let us say, Amen. I'll ask that the pallbearers and the honorary pallbearers please step forward to the casket as we escort Bernie.
Ladies and gentlemen, after Bernie's casket has left the sanctuary, if you're going to the cemetery, kindly go directly to your cars immediately. If you're not going to the cemetery, please stay here until we've left in the procession.
יושב בסתר עליון בצל שדי תלונן אמר לאדוני מחזיר את סעודתי אלוהי יפתח בו כי הוא יציל אותך מפח יבוש מדבר הבוא בעברתו יסך לך ותחת כנפיו תפסה